It's a heavy feeling when your phone rings and your stomach just drops. Most of us have been there. Today, we're looking at how you can actually step back from the conflict and start protecting yourself in your own headspace when that phone starts pinging. Welcome back to the Champion Mindset Collective podcast. I'm your host, Anthony Dahya. Today, I'm sitting down with Sol Kennedy. We're talking about something that hits close to home for a lot of people. It's the constant stress of co-parenting, and when things aren't going well, at that point where you are just exhausted and you're looking at a better way to handle the conflict. Sol has some pretty interesting ideas on how to use things like AI and clear boundaries to take the heat off those conversations. It's about finding a bit of peace so that you can actually be there for your kids. Sol Kennedy spent 7 years as a full-time dad before he moving back into the tech world. He used to be a product manager at Google, but then it was his own experience with the high conflict divorce that really changed things for him. He realized that parents in this situation and every new message on their phone can feel like a threat. It keeps our nervous system on edge, and it makes what almost impossible to be present for your kids. So Sol decided to use what he knows about tech and to solve this. He founded Best Interest, which is an app that uses AI to filter out the noise. It keeps the most important logistics about the kids, but blocks the toxic stuff and the drama out. The best part of it is that it works even if the parent isn't on board. His work has been backed by experts like Dr. Ramani, and he's helping a lot of people find some peace and set proper boundaries. So it's really great to have you here on the Champion Mindset Collective podcast. Welcome.
Thanks for having me on today. It's a pleasure to be with you.
It's my pleasure. So before we go into questions, I'd really love for you to share your journey in life from childhood to now. How did you get here?
Well, I've always thought of myself as a creative person. Even as a kid, I loved to come up with new things to create and bring into the world. And I think that creative interest sparked my entrepreneurship drive. And maybe inspired by my father, who had his own company. That was my vehicle for my creativity. And when I was 12, I started my first software company. And then it just all became startup after startup after startup until I eventually ended up at Google through an acquisition. And I just believe that, especially with software, it's truly amazing to be an entrepreneur. And especially now with the world and how fast it's changing with AI, it's really exciting to be in this space and to be building for people. And yeah, that's who I am.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. And you're so right. Gone are the days when you relied on SaaS companies to build products and, you have to pay monthly subscriptions and stuff. And now you can just build things yourself, as you've done and as I've done. And it's a great place to be, where you're using your own creativity and your critical thinking to create products. So you mentioned that your own divorce was a real turning point for you. So I'd love to start there. What was that season in your life actually like on a daily basis?
So Anthony, if you told me 6 years ago when I was just getting started with my divorce that I would be running an app that's helping co-parents, really saving their lives from this situation, I wouldn't have believed you, because when you're in it, you can't see out of it. It felt like my world was collapsing. Here, you go through a divorce and we were each moving into our own homes. It was in COVID, so there was all that stress on top of it. And I was just feeling a lot of stress on the daily. And I was noticing that I was glued to my phone, but not because I was looking at social, but because I was getting messages from my co-parent on the regular. And some of them were very important co-parenting topics. There was a lot of decisions that needed to be made during that time. And there were a lot of things that actually, looking back, were completely unnecessary engagement. And in a way, we were kind of mirroring the sorts of conflicts that we had in our marriage. And it wasn't healthy for either one of us. But when you're in it, you don't necessarily see it. You don't see that it's unhealthy. But I knew that there was something wrong. And there was this moment that I recall distinctly of lying in my bed and I'm drifting off to sleep. And sleep is very precious for, all co-parents. And I heard this ding on my phone. And it was the notification noise from a co-parenting app that I was using at the time. And in that moment, I felt my heart starting to race and there was sweat on my brow. And I knew that it was a message from my ex, and I wouldn't be able to go to sleep until I had read it. And now, if looking at that, that really felt more like a trap. What I wanted
Mm,
was peace, but what I had was a trap. And I was already doing everything that the family court suggested, use a co parenting app, don't just text directly. Okay. But I was still experiencing this very challenging dynamic. And so I knew that there was a problem there, but I didn't at the time have the tools that I needed to solve it, with the exception that I thought, well, gosh, I get triggered by these messages, but maybe someone who is like a third party wouldn't. And so I immediately thought, okay, well, I'll just hire a customer support guy to be my customer service for my co-parenting relationship. Crazy idea, but in a way, it actually worked. I brought him on, and he was reading the messages and sort of filtering them for me. And as ridiculous as that sounds, it actually gave me a little bit of space to breathe.
mm,
And it wasn't scalable. It wasn't a business. It was just a little bit more peace for me. And then fast forward to about 3 years ago, I was playing around with AI for the first time. I'd heard about this cool new thing called ChatGPT, and I thought, wow, this might be really fun to make bedtime stories for my kids. And so I was doing that with them. We were coming up with creative ideas for stories, and then we were letting AI generate a new story every night. Sure beat saying the same book again and again every night with them. So that was fun. But one of those nights I thought, gosh, maybe I could use AI to feed in the co-parenting messages that I was receiving to give me some clarity and understanding of what's, because you feel so alone being a co-parent sometimes, in your experience. And I felt really alone. So I loaded up the messages into ChatGPT, and it felt like it understood what I was going through. It started telling me some concrete steps of how I could respond. And it was in that moment that I realized, okay, here is the potential solution for this problem that I and so many millions of others are going through. And so that was the spark that ignited best interest.
yeah. Awesome. Thank you for sharing that. Also, being a co-parent and having co-parented for the last 11 and a half years, the early years were tough, like you mentioned. Although what I found personally was that in the beginning, I probably wasn't looking at myself and what was happening internally, but things were triggering me, and I wasn't really aware of what was happening for me. But then it came to a point where I was actually, hang on, I'm on a journey of self-development and becoming a better version of myself. What are these messages actually giving me information that I can use positively and apply in my life? And so for me, it was around really getting that insight. Now, this is way before ChatGPT came along, but by the time that ChatGPT had come along, my co-parenting relationship is well under, you know, yeah, I totally agree. When you're first going through those initial years of co-parenting, and for some people it can be long lasting as well. It's a tough time to be able to manage all that in yourself. And
Yeah.
yeah,
There's so much changing in your life as a co-parent, and there's so much external stress that when you add the relational stress, it can be very overwhelming. And I love what you said about personal growth through challenge. I think that divorce is one of the most uniquely challenging human experiences that we've ever invented. And it is such a wonderful time of growth if you choose to look at it from that perspective. We can take these experiences and we can stay in the victim seat and, call the co parent a narcissist or whatever, might kind of feel good for a moment, but it's not going to resolve anything. And it's not a long term healing process. It's
mm,
so much better if we can learn how to, like you said, take a growth mindset, learn how to shift from a victim to being an operator in your life and shift those perspectives so that you can grow from this experience and improve. And I know that looking back at my life, when I was married, I was honestly a very different person. I don't quite relate to the person that was in that relationship, nor really that relationship, as strange as that is. I've done a lot of work related
mm,
to relationships, intimacy, personal development, and understanding. And it is actually all thanks to the divorce, because before then life was comfortable and suddenly it wasn't comfortable. And I knew I needed to change things in order to improve and grow and create a better life, which I feel I have done and I'm doing.
yeah, 100%. And I believe that people come into your life for a reason and a season, and to teach you um, things about yourself. We
Absolutely.
are, yeah,
I often say I believe that she is my ex is my best teacher in my
yeah,
entire life.
100%, yeah. And for me, like 11 and a half years later, I have a great co-parenting relationship with my ex-partner, and we treat each other like family now, and
So great.
we're always there if either of us need each other. We just don't have that a romantic or connection, but we are like good friends. And for that reason, my daughter is actually in a really good space. She's 12 years now. So when did you realize that the way you were communicating wasn't sustainable anymore?
Well, I think it was just that moment of lying in bed and realizing that I was constantly engaging. It was almost like an addiction to the conflict, right? As much as I didn't see it that way at that time, I was feeling very victimy. But looking back, I realized that I felt stuck and I knew I wanted to shift things. And, one of the challenges that I faced in our dynamic, especially early on, was I wasn't raised with boundaries. I didn't know anything about them. In fact, I still distinctly recall sitting with my therapist and I was relating something that was going on, and she paused me and said, "Well, you can set a boundary about that." I'm like, "What do you mean? What is a boundary?" Right? And then she had to define it for me. And then I had to go through the thought process of, well, I can't set a boundary. She's going to do whatever, right? And there was this whole layer that I had to get through to get to a place where I could effectively set boundaries. And to jump to the conclusion, I really think that setting boundaries is such a important skill to learn for all aspects of your life. And it
Mm,
really all comes down to your own love for yourself. The more that you love yourself, the more that you respect yourself, the more you can set boundaries because you're not afraid of what the other person will do or if the other person will reject you for setting a boundary. And in so many ways, I've set boundaries with friends, family members. Some of those relationships I have lost, but it was actually in the end better that I lost those because they
yeah.
weren't healthy relationships. So by setting boundaries, you're actually helping to not only improve certain relationships, but you're also potentially losing the ones that aren't really good for you.
100% agree with you. The boundary setting is so important. And I had the same experience that once I started to set the boundaries, I was creating a protection for myself, and not only from anything that was where it was triggering me, but also I had a safe space I created for myself that I could think and breathe and be one with myself. And so we've got to teach the other person how to treat us. Just like they're teaching us about ourselves, we've also got to do the same thing, because at the end of the day, we are all projecting our insecurities, and then people are mirroring back to us. And so we've got to do the same so that they can also. And the interesting thing is, both me and my ex-partner have gone through growth because we both took it as a positive thing.
I was going to say that the story that you hear sometimes from co-parents is, look, we get along, things are good. We're basically just friends. And I think that if you're hearing that and you're not in that place yourself in your co-parenting dynamic, that can feel really sad because we really all want that. We have this vision of what a perfect co-parenting arrangement would look like. And, going to the games together, collaborating effectively, like making decisions well. But sometimes that's not attainable. And when I heard your story, what I heard was here are two co parents that along the way did the work and grew, let go of the past. And that takes a lot of healing to do that. But once you do that, there's nothing that can create the conflict because co parenting conflict literally doesn't make sense. You share the same interests. You both love your kids. You want them to do well. But sometimes a lot of stuff gets in the way. And so you got to heal that stuff to get to that place. And
Yeah,
sometimes it's a one-sided thing. And if that's the way it is, then that's the way it is.
yeah, agreed, totally. What did that constant state of high alert to do to your ability to be present as a father?
Well, that's a really big thing. I think that I define for kids, I see My presence is my love. All kids really want from us adults is us to pay attention to them. Doesn't honestly really matter what we're doing. Just watching is oftentimes good enough. But when we're on our phones or we're even thinking about something like thinking about the conflict or the upcoming court date or whatever, we're not truly present with them. And they can feel that. Kids are so incredibly perceptive of the energy that you're putting into that relationship. And so, yeah, I was definitely really distracted. I still get distracted by co parenting, but being able to, I've gotten to a place where I have a much more present relationship with my kids and I'm more aware of when I need to step away. When I'm noticing that I'm feeling distracted or I'm not really present, then I let them know, well, actually, I'm needing to take care of something. I'll be back in half an hour. And then I go and, take a walk or whatever I need to do to recenter myself. So I'm not giving that kind of half-assed attention, if that makes sense.
Yeah, and you discovered that the real issue isn't the lack of tools, but how our nervous systems get triggered by messages. So how did you come to that realization?
It's an interesting world that we live in that it used to be when you had a conflict with someone and maybe you were part of the same tribe or in the same community, you could kind of create physical distance, right? And you would also know Sally's approaching. I need to get prepared. But now what's happening is you're getting messages from everyone all the time at any time. That's the world we've created with cell phones. And there's an expectation oftentimes of immediate communication. When our relationships are good, that type of dynamic is hard enough on our brains to always be available at any point. But then if you add on conflict and potentially very toxic communication, that can be extremely challenging to manage. And in my own situation, I was finding that there were times where I'd be with the kids, we'd be having a great time. I'd get a ping on my phone, not knowing what it's all about, read it, and suddenly my heart's racing and I'm thinking about this threat of court or whatever, right? And so that is really no way to stay present. It's no way to live. And it does require, I think, tools to help us manage that always on aspect. And when you're dealing with someone like a challenging boss, you can put them on silent or you can even block them, right? So they can't message you on your personal number. That's fine. But when you're dealing with someone like an ex, you actually have to be available to them, court ordered. You have to be responsive, respond within 24 hours. And that creates this tie that is really problematic for so many people.
Exactly. Why do you think we feel so obligated to respond to every toxic message when the phone pings?
I think that we're not responding with a lot of thought oftentimes. A toxic message, especially if you have a lot of trauma from childhood or through the marriage, it's almost like you're pre-programmed to respond. You'll get a toxic message and then you'll respond defensively and feel like you need to defend yourself, right? And it's so unconscious that your frontal lobe's not really even engaging. You're not thinking about maybe this message might end up in court in 2 months or whatever. All those centers have been shut down. And I think that one of the tips that I learned early on that was really helpful, even before best interests around, I just made an internal boundary for myself that I would not respond to anything right away. In fact, I just set a thought in my head that when I receive a message, I would always put my phone physically down and I would walk away from it. And that allowed me to just kind of sometimes go for a walk outside, but also just to slow everything down. And over time, I learned that by slowing it down, it was giving me an opportunity to feel what was going on inside of me. Instead of just responding and getting that junk food hit of the response and bypassing what was going on, suddenly I was walking away. I was feeling what was going on in my body, and I was able to get better awareness about how those messages were causing reactions in me. And when I did that healing, then it was more natural to just not be so affected by that communication.
And
And to underline it, to just say that that is a rule for everything. It's not
mm,
just from toxic communication, because what's happening when you receive that message, literally your frontal lobe shuts down. So someone could be sitting next to you and say, hey, whoa, maybe you shouldn't send that, bro. But actually, you're going to say, no, I'm fine. I'm not triggered. Because in that moment, you're not even aware that you're acting
Mm,
from trigger because that frontal lobe is shut down. So it's better to just set a rule that is easy to follow regardless of what the message says. No matter if it's good or bad, you're going to set down the phone and take a break.
yeah. That's great advice. I think it's really good advice because even if you might be even if you're excited about responding, you want to be able to just take that in for a moment and then go, okay, how do I respond to this now? You know,
Yeah, exactly.
yeah. So I'm interested in the tech side of things. So how does AI filter out the noise and change the power dynamic in a high conflict resolution?
Yeah, so we have a few different ways of doing this. So I'm going to take it a step back and be a little bit more theoretical here for a second, because I believe that AI will play a larger and larger role for all of us, not just co-parents, in peacekeeping. And I think it can do that because AI is this really magical, LLMs are really magical tools that understand language, nuance, can read between the lines. And because of this, they can really absorb all of the emotions that we might spew into language. And they don't take any of that on, right? They're not going to get upset. They don't have those emotions. So even highly trained mediator might get triggered sometimes by the way you communicate with them, but an AI won't. So here we have this really amazing tool that can take in your language, process it, and give you feedback and say, Anthony, actually, this would be a better way to get your point across. Or if you communicate this way, it's not going to look good for a judge. That type of rationale can really help you dial down your own anger, your own emotions. And it can help you engage with that frontal lobe in a bigger way. So that's one of the features that we use and employ in Best Interest, is that we review all of the messages that you're about to send before you send it. And that gives you a chance to pause and consider. And we're not reviewing necessarily for spelling or grammar. That's not the point. The point is actually, what is the communication that you're presenting, and how is it going to be received by the other side? And sometimes we don't really know, especially if we're in trigger, we're not super aware of how the other side will see it. So we try to reflect back how it's going to be received.
Yeah.
And then the other thing that we do is we apply that same logical filter onto a filter on the receiving side. So when you receive a message from your parent in Best Interest, whether or not they're using the app, because we actually allow you to use the app even if you're not both using the app, if that makes sense. We'll filter the message, stripping it of any content that is not child focused, which allows you to trust that the notifications that you receive from Best Interest are safe for your eyes. So that ding that you might get on another co-parenting app or your text messaging where your heart races, that can settle because we've already done the pre-processing for you, so that you know that the message you're getting is more or less collaborative, and it's not going to bring in the past or be toxic in any way. And if you want to see the original message, you can, but that gives you the opportunity to take effective action on your co-parent's request without needing to be dragged into the battle that sometimes co-parents find themselves in. And that's really how we're shortcutting. We're helping to reduce the conflict in these co-parenting relationships.
Yeah. The question I had was, if we're all different and we're all going through different things, we've all had different experiences, and I'm guessing that the AI is using a general knowledge base. Is there an opportunity for an individual to talk to the AI, give AI the context of what they've been through? It could be even going back to childhood, and then be able to then how they're feeling about themselves and the situation, and for that to then be personalized so that when a response comes through, the AI understands exactly what you're going through at any given point of time.
I love that picture that you're painting for me. I
Yeah,
especially love this idea of being able to go in and sit down like with a therapist and explain what was going on and maybe why you might be triggered. I think that's really beautiful. We do some of that. So, what we do to create a personalized image of each co parent, like you said, every person and every relationship is different. And there are even terms like gaslighting or a dog whistling, where a third party looking at the conversation may not understand the nuance or why that message might come across as triggering for the receiver. But if you understood the context of all of the communication, you would. And so, what we do is we allow users, when they receive messages that they find triggering, they can indicate that and then give us more context, right? And in that, we actually save information about them and what they find triggering so that in the future, we're more likely to detect it and strip that out. Even if it seems like it would be benign to most people, that allows us to essentially train the algorithm on each individual so that their experience is better. And then the other thing we do is you can upload your parenting plan and custody orders, which allows us to then give you guidance, especially when we're reviewing messages that you might send that might violate your parenting plan. You should know that. So
Mm.
we will do our best to identify that and reference your own parenting plan so that you feel informed at all times.
And the data that is saved is securely saved. It's not risk to PII.
Correct. Yeah.
Yeah, cool. How do you navigate the fear that you might miss something actually important regarding the kids?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So what we do is I'm a big fan of taking personal responsibility, especially in the age of AI. I never envisioned best interest is going to go agentic. I see this as these are co-parent directed actions, and it is the parent's responsibility at the end of the day. So we're going to provide filtering and guidance, and we're going to help them navigate this relationship. But at the end of the day, we're using AI, and AI can make mistakes. So you can always view that original message that's been filtered, and we'll even indicate on the message that comes through, there's more to the message. We'll even flag it if there is, for example, a threat of physical violence, or if the message seems urgent. We'll flag those so that you know to take a look at that original message to see what's really in there. And at the same time, too, we'll never respond or send a message on your behalf. You're always responsible for what you send. And if you want to take the guidance that the best interest co-parent coach gives you, or if you want to ignore the guidance, then you can, and you can send whatever you want. But then your co-parent has the benefit of the shield. So we're going to filter that message still, because it's really up to the receiver of how they would like to be spoken with.
That's great. That's really great. What happened to your own stress levels once you stopped seeing the insults and stayed focused on the gear and the schedules?
Yeah, I really like that, the way you frame that. So I know that for myself, I can't learn in an environment where I'm always stressed to the max. And there was definitely a time in my divorce process where I was so stressed that I was just treading water. And being able to take a step back allowed me to do some of the healing that was necessary for me to get through this whole thing in the first place. So I believe that both my own personal growth journey and learning how to manage this communication more effectively was really instrumental in helping me to heal and get where I am today.
And that healing journey is a constant thing, right?
Oh my gosh. Yeah, absolutely. And it's applicable to everything. You know, you go through a divorce. I have not met anyone that said that it has made them a weaker person. No, it like adversity makes us stronger, and you will walk away having gone through the divorce a stronger, more capable person in all aspects of your life.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah. Yeah, definitely. And there's layers to the trauma and the healing as well. And you've got to get through the layers like an onion and keep peeling it until you get to the core. And then as you do that, it gets us closer to our true, authentic self as well.
I like the way, yeah, totally. I see this in a very similar way. I like the onion analogy. I think that we are all born on this planet as ourselves. A baby is itself. It hasn't been taught some of the bad habits that adults have taught it yet. So I think that the process of healing is actually just getting closer to that original state before all the garbage was dumped on us by
Yeah.
our parents and our caregivers.
Yeah. But there is so when I was doing coaching, there is a framework called the core, the crud and the crust. I don't know if you've heard of it. Have you
No, I
heard
have
of
not.
that? No. So basically, when you're born, you're at your purest form, and then you think about like a ball. But I like to think of it as a window, right? And your purest form, and you can see through it, and it's crystal clear. Then over as you go through life, as your formidable years, and then you go into teenage and so on, all this crud starts to form over the top. So it's all of a sudden it's starting to get blurry, and you can't see your true self, right? Then what you start doing is you're going, well, I don't want to show myself this crud to anyone else. So you start then putting like a crust over the top, which could be like a piece of paper that so that no one can see in. It's like having a dirty room. You close the door and people come and you don't want people to see stuff inside your room. And then all of a sudden you're wearing a mask and you're not actually being your true self. But when you start taking the paper off and wiping the window and then you get more clear, then you're going more towards your authentic self, your true self, that your pure self. And so it's almost like you come to this earth pure, you get dirty, and then our job is to then take all that out and get clear again before we go to the next journey, wherever that is, whatever dimension we're going into, right? From this third dimension that we're in. So that's the analogy that I use is like it's a window that's dirty and
That is also a really great analogy, and it fits with my experience. I have done a lot of work in internal family systems, if you're familiar, IFS, and and in that system, I see that as we have these parts of ourselves that, for whatever reason, don't feel loved. Maybe we were a kid and we were told that we needed to be smaller, right? That we're taking up too much space or we're too sensitive, right? Whatever those labels that we got attached to along the way. And those are little parts of ourselves that we carry along that are exiles and don't really loved. They're not included. They're not part of, but they are part of ourselves. And so the more that you can learn how to speak with those exiled parts and include them and say, you're welcome here, you're loved, I can see why you would feel that way, and I love this part of you. You're saying that to yourself, but what you're doing is, like you mentioned, you're clearing off that, you're removing that mask, you're getting back to who you are, you're removing the label, and you're accepting, I've always been that, and there's nothing wrong with the way that I am.
we've just lost ourselves in that process, and we come to this earth to remember who we are. And
That's part of the game.
our
Yeah.
journey is to remember who we are. Now, a lot of people think that successful co-parenting means being friends, but you talk about protecting your peace. And why is that distinction so important?
Here's an analogy. So we look at TV ads that show us wealthy people driving around in fancy cars, and they do that to sell us a product, to make us feel inferior. We're not feeling very good necessarily about that situation, right? But that's what the world we live in. With co-parenting, I think that there is a similar experience that happens for a lot of co-parents that are in a high conflict relationship, where they hear about that normalized, everyone should just get along for the kids. And, look at this co-parent, they're best friends. Why can't you do that? And I think that induces a lot of shame. And I think the reality that I hear about oftentimes in closed co-parenting groups where people just actually share what the real experience is like, is that it's really painful for a lot of people. And in fact, for most, those that are present and aware of what it feels like to go through divorce, those that aren't bypassing, it's really hard. You got to experience whatever happened up into the point of deciding to get divorced, right? There might have been a betrayal, there might have been anything leading up to the point where you feel abandoned. Those are hard feelings to process. And so if you're fully present with that, you're going to be in a lot of pain. And you might even be taking that pain and lashing out and feeling like a victim. And you can get stuck in that, or you can learn how to grow and learn how to adapt and learn how to take back some of that control and rebuild your life. I advocate for people to start when they're first starting out in the earliest part of their co-parenting journey. Trust is completely gone usually, and I don't know why that happened. It doesn't really matter, but you need to restore trust. Friends have trust. You trust your friends, right? Romantic partners have trust. You need to start with trust. So with co-parents, you need to start building those bricks, brick by brick, before you can get to the kumbaya, everyone's a happy family and we gather on, Christmas holiday. But yeah, it has to start small. It has to be living agreements that are honored. It needs to be honored boundaries, right? And you start small and you build from there. Some co parenting dynamics, especially when there is some sort of personality disorder involved, you may never get there, and that's okay. But I think that if we normalize that it needs to start with trust and build from there, then I think that's closer to the lived reality that a lot of co parents go through. And let's celebrate when people get through that instead of bypassing it.
Yeah, absolutely. What would you say to the parent who feels like they're failing because they just can't get along with their.
You're not failing. I think the most important thing to do when you get divorced is focus on yourself, create stability. You've just gone through a crashing airplane. You need to put on your mask first before you help anyone else because you are a mess. Your life is a mess. So find that stability first, renegotiate and reform that relationship with your kids, find the new normal. And then from that place, learn how to navigate co parenting in a good way. And that also may never happen. The best way that you can co parent may be to be using a co parenting app and have very strict boundaries about what gets talked about and have everything in writing. That may be the best for you. And if that's the case, then okay, accept that, be at peace with it. And over time, the hope is, and for most co parents, this does happen over time, some of those original resentments get shoved in the back or they get healed. And then you can start having a better dynamic. But there's nothing wrong with being in that first gear the entire way through. It's okay.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, we were talking about boundaries before. How do you define a healthy boundary when the person on the other side is actively trying to cross it?
Well, oftentimes, when you're setting a boundary with someone, they will. They will try to cross it, and so that's why it's so important to first start with setting your own internal boundaries, and that means practicing on yourself, like the boundary I mentioned before. I will not respond to a message when if it's just come to me. I will only respond after it's been sitting there for 30 minutes. When you're first learning how to set and honor boundaries, that alone is hard enough to honor your own boundaries. But what you're doing is you're developing trust in yourself and you're developing an idea and a feeling of what it's like to be respected because you're respecting yourself, your own boundaries. So that's the first step. And then the second step is learning how to, at least this was for me, but I think this is very common, learning how to accept that the other person may reject you. They may call you bad. They may reject your boundary. They may put you down. They may have an impact on you that might hurt. But if you accept that that will happen when you start setting boundaries with people, then it's easier to set them without worry. And then the other thing it's really important to keep in mind about boundaries is that you alone need to be responsible for enforcing them. So an example of that might be if you talk to me in that tone again, I will be leaving the conversation. And then you need to enforce it 100%. There can't be a moment where you don't enforce it because that sends the message. And if I know anything about those with personality disorders, they're like velociraptors testing the electric fence. They will always try to touch that electric fence and that boundary and see if it's still there. And you have to just remind them, no, it's there. Bye. I told you that I don't want you speaking to me that way. And I'm going to leave for now. We can talk again tomorrow. Because you're enforcing your own boundary, then you're not leaving it up to them to do it. And that it takes back the reins, takes you out of the victim seat, and suddenly you have the power. But it takes, I think, those 3 steps to be able to get to that place where you can do that.
Yeah. I also would like to add to that would be understanding your own values in your life, but also what are the values of a relationship or a co-parenting relationship, and then making sure that if some of the things don't align to your values, then you've got to guard it and let it go. And
Yeah, I
I
like
think
that.
I think it also starts with forgiveness of yourself and then forgiving the other person, because neither of you were set out in majority of the cases, neither party set out to be, negative or toxic to each other. It's just situations that cause that. So you've got to let go of those situations. And as Dr. Gabriel Mate talks about, he says that the situations are traumatic, but holding on to it is creating the trauma. So if you're holding on to those situations, then you're actually creating your own suffering and your own trauma as well.
Yeah, isn't that the truth? And to speak to the often thrown around term narcissism, I think in co-parenting we hear that word thrown around a lot, and it's technically a diagnosed term, and for the most part, therapists would say most people who are called narcissists by their co-parents would not be diagnosable. The experience, I think, it is true that these parents don't feel seen, and they feel like maybe their ex is out to get them, and that's a true experience. It's a very painful experience, but in those situations, being the one that maybe you're calling your ex a narcissist, it's helpful to find the empathy for their experience. So hard to do, but I would never want to be a narcissist. It's literally, if you imagine it, it's a torture chamber of mirrors. You don't see the world as it is. You see the world as the parts of you are showing it to you. You're projecting all the time. And I can only imagine that would be an extremely confusing existence and really painful. So having compassion for that person in our life where we're experiencing that type of dynamic, like, why am I taking this personally? It's actually not about me. They have this situation going on for them, and it's probably a really painful lived experience. So let's send them some compassion
Yeah,
and do our best with what we can do, what we can control.
yeah, 100% agree. What was the first thing that you noticed when about your relationship with your children once you had that digital shield in place?
Well, I mean, the being more present with them has definitely improved my relationship, not only with not being so distracted by the co-parenting and conflict, but even just in my own life, setting boundaries for myself about when I'm on my phone and when I'm not. It can be very addictive to be on our phones, especially around our kids. And I was finding this pattern of when I was feeling stressed out, I was going to my phone and just, scrolling. And that wasn't giving them the presence time that they wanted. And so then they became, in a way, more demanding. And I wasn't recognizing that I was creating that dynamic. And so what I've done is I've made it a point. So I've set up some physical aids to help me so that I'm on my phone less. No phones at the dinner table. Oh my gosh, so important. And just being present with them when we're all eating. And the other thing that we've done in our house, which has helped a lot, is we've created a phone free zone. So our living room, we can't even bring the phone in. So that means no pictures, no using the phone to play music. It just doesn't, those don't exist in that room. And that gives the kids an opportunity that if they want my full and undivided attention, they invite me into the room. They don't have to say, Dad, get off your phone, which sometimes is a challenging thing for a kid to say, but they can invite me, come watch, I want to dance, and then they bring me into the phone free room.
Yeah,
And there are these little tricks I think that we can use to increase that presence. And anytime we give our kids more presence, our relationship naturally improves.
yeah. And when you got that space from your ex, but you also got that space with your children, what did it do to your mindset and your health?
Well, it's I would say that I'm just in a really good place in my life right now. Honestly. I feel much more in control of my choices in life. I find a much stronger relationship with the work that I do. I feel very aligned with my mission and purpose in life, and I feel this incredible connection building with my kids that I appreciate. And I wouldn't say that it was any one thing other than I knew what it was like 6 years ago, and I was really really struggling. And I know what it's like now, and I just feel really at peace. I feel that I have so much goodness in my life. And that has been built through a lot of hard work and healing and growth. And I'm really glad where my life is today.
how did you rebuild your identity, and what would you say to people listening in terms of how they can also do that as well?
I smashed it into little bits. I was raised with this idea. I think it's also a cultural idea that you can't change, that your mind is basically the way it's going to be. And I have the lived experience of changing who I am. I look back at who I was in my marriage and before, and I was a very shy, reserved, person that would never take up space. Even in my group of friends, I was the one that really never spoke, and I played things safe. And I always had this kind of nibbling in my mind that it was like an unsettled feeling, like something wasn't quite right. But I looked around my life and I thought, gosh, I have it made. Why am I not happy? You know, things are going well. Why am I not happy? And it took going through the process of rediscovering myself and growing and healing that allowed me to become more of myself. And I'll be honest, I think that if my former self looked at me now, looked at the colorful shirts that I wear and the art that I put up on my walls, I probably would judge the heck out of myself now, you know, because I was so reserved. And yet I think judgment and jealousy are oftentimes just a reflection of who we are and what we would like to be. And we put this funny little mask on it saying, you know, that they're, you know, that's a hippie or whatever. I think that's a calling in. Maybe there's a little part of you that wants some of that for yourself, and that's why you're feeling that way.
Yeah,
And so now I don't judge who I am. I love who I am.
yeah. Isn't it interesting that as we go through this journey from childhood to the point where you go through all that trauma, adversity, and then you shift your identity, because we're shifting identities all the time. But you get to that point where you let go of that programming and you let go of all that stuff that you've been taught, and all you could see is grey or black. But then all of a sudden, once you start getting back to your authentic, your core self, you start to see all this color, and you're so much more freer, and you don't really care what other people think, right?
Yeah. Yeah, because you've let go of you've let go of the need for someone else's approval. I have actually fairly recently gotten to a place where I can say that I am fully okay if someone thinks that I'm an asshole. Totally fine with that. In fact, being willing to be that in a dynamic has freed me up to just be more of who I am. And it doesn't mean that I'm a bad guy. It takes getting to a place where I realize that I'm just a good person
Yeah,
to allow me to let others perceive me in the way that they want to.
exactly.
And
Yeah,
when I do that, that allows them to heal too. It's better for all of us.
100%. It's information, so people may perceive you a certain way, but there may be their own insecurities or something in their life that's projecting out. And like you said, you just let them perceive you the way they are. But eventually, if they do the work as well, they're going to get to a point where they can also be able to see their authentic selves and not be so judgmental and so on.
Yeah,
Yeah, people are
and
always
you're
going to say things to us.
and you're freeing up so much energy too. I was spending a lot of time in my head contemplating how to control other people's perceptions of me. Wanting them to believe a certain thing about me is a form of covert control. And if you let go of that, then suddenly you have a lot more things that you can think about rather than that.
Yeah.
It has nothing to do with you, what other people think of you.
No, no, it doesn't. And, for me, it was 2021. I was listening to Jay Shetty, one of his podcast episodes, and he said, you don't need validation from anyone except for yourself. And I was seeking so much validation back then. And at work, from that moment, I flipped and I went, I don't care. I don't need validation. I know I've done a good job. I know I did this. Because we're looking for we were looking for that uh, someone to tell us we've done a great job, or but if you know deep in your heart that you've done and you're a good person and you're being your energy and your vibration is of love, then love and hate, they're not good or bad. They're just opposites of each other. Just as like I've loved using this analogy. You have a battery which has a negative charge and a positive charge. Now, it doesn't mean that half the battery is wrong or bad, because without the negative charge, you can't create energy. Just like masculine and feminine, we all have masculine and feminine within us. So at times we need to be in our feminine, and at times we need to be in our masculine.
And that applies to co-parenting dynamics. It applies to really any interaction that we walk away from feeling negative. When we perceive the other as the perpetrator doing something bad to us, we get ourselves in a kind of a stuck position. But when I've learned how to instead perceive it as, and to change my mind about this, that this person in my life is helping me to define who I am. So I might be perceiving them as, I don't know, egoic and controlling and whatever. Well, gosh, thank you for showing that to me, because by seeing this, I now know who I am. I know who I don't want to be, and I know how I would like to show up better. You've given me some signal to help me define myself. And I think that it's exactly right. Like the battery terminals is a perfect analogy. We go through this life learning how to define who we are, learning how to find it. And everyone, including the ones that we might identify as the bad ones, are helping us to define that.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, they're showing us the light. When we're in the darkness, they're showing us where the light is. And if we choose to take that information and do something with it, then we're actually going to go towards the light. Yeah. And, at the end of every tunnel, there is a light, unless it's blocked off. But in most cases, at the end of every tunnel, there is a light, and you just got to find it. Yeah. So for those people listening who feel trapped in the cycle of toxic messages right now, what does it actually look like to take your power back?
Well, I would encourage a listener who is interested in changing their dynamic to look at how they themselves are interacting and how they're responding, and to take the limelight off of their co-parent and focus on what they can control. Because at the end of the day, you can't control your co-parent. You can only change the way that you react and how you perceive them. So to give you just a very simple example of a mindset shift that I have felt in my life, that I credit to my therapist, she helped me see this. We can look at our co-parent and we can assign labels, but the best label I've been able to assign to my co-parent is teacher, that she's this wonderful teacher. And when I have that perception, I can't see any wrong in her actions, because she is helping me to understand more about myself. I get a message that's triggering and I go inward and I say, okay, teacher, what are you teaching me today about myself? And I think that type of reframe that gives you the power back is the best thing that you can do in any type of challenging relationship.
And what is one first step that they can take today to feel completely, if they're feeling completely overwhelmed by the inbox? What's the first step they can take? Of course, there's better help.
I would hope that they would consider downloading the Best Interest app. We have a free version available. You can find us on the iOS App Store or the Android Play Store, and we have a subscription for those that want more advanced AI features. But I started Best Interest because I've lived this and I know how painful it can be. And I just feel so much enthusiasm for helping solve this for other co-parents going through it, because I know that every single parent that we reach and help give some peace to today, we're helping their kids and perhaps even the generations. So I see Best Interest as helping not only the parents, but also their children.
Yeah. And I've got another question for you. So how do you stay committed to your own growth when the other person's not changing at all?
Yeah, I mean, that's a hard one. And yet, when you start showing up differently in your relationships, they have to change. They might go through a period of getting worse, but if you're not giving that relationship the fuel that it needs to sustain itself, then it's going to have to change.
Yeah.
There's no way it can stay the same.
No,
So
exactly.
that is the biggest reason for why you need to focus on you and what you can control. Because at the end of the day, your complaints about how they're treating you it's never going to land well. It's never going to result really in any positive outcome. But you just starting to show up differently and respond simpler, respond with less emotion yourself, make it more of a business relationship, then that can only help the relationship going forward.
100%. Okay, so people can go to Apple App Store to
Mhm.
find a version of us version of the Best Interest app, and they can go to the Google Play Store, is it?
Yep.
To find the
And
Android
or you can just go to bestinterestapp.com
app.com.
and the download links are on there too.
Yeah, and people may want to get in contact with you. How do they get in connect with you?
Absolutely. Yeah, I love hearing from fellow co-parents. So you can just reach me at founder@bestinterest.app. I'd love if you wanted to try out the app and give me your feedback and ask me or tell me what you need to support you in your co-parenting dynamic. I'd love to hear from you.
Yeah, 100%. I'm passionate about this because I've lived this myself last 11, 12 years. Here's an example of how good my co-parenting relationship is. My ex messaged me this morning and she said, I'm $600 short on my mortgage. Is there any way you can help me? I didn't even flinch. I literally transferred the money, said it's in your account. You know, now what I want to do is what I'm doing is building an academy. It's called the Champion Academy. And if you're watching this episode, there's a currently founding members link that I'm going to share in the show notes. And so if you don't already have a course or something, I would love to co-create a course with you that we can host on the Champion Academy, where we can help build the community and we can help people. You may already have a community of your own. If you don't, then let's do something together and
Great. That sounds
co-create a
awesome. Thank
yeah.
you.
Yeah. So the idea is that what will happen with this episode, by the way, is that there'll be all the links in the show notes. And then also there'll be an episode page created on the championmindsetcollective.com website. It's more of a hub. On that page, you'll find Soul's bio, his links, the Spotify link as well. There'll be an article written from this, and there'll be a 3-page guide that you can download. It'll give you some reflection points, some insights, and then also some practical ways you can start your journey right now. And then, of course, download the app as well and get into contact with Soul. In addition to that, all the videos will be there. And so you'll even be able to track your own video performance for each of these videos that will get published as well. So there's lots of information and a lot more value that you can get from the actual page itself rather than just looking at the show notes. Now, we're at the quick fire round. So you've got 6 very quick questions, and you can answer these in a single word or a very short sentence. And the first question for you is, how do you define success, and has that definition evolved for you over time?
Success is finding alignment with your purpose in life and running with it.
Who's been your greatest inspiration and why?
Honestly, I feel constantly inspired by my kids and watching them grow. I learn so much from them and their questions and their raw experience.
100%. And also, I would say you'd be inspired by where you've come from, your own journey as well.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, exactly. What is something that you believe that others may disagree with?
Thinking about that one for a second. I have a lot of crazy ideas, so it's hard to come up with just one. I have come to really appreciate peace. And I think that I didn't know how wonderful peace was until I really experienced it. I used to fill that void in my life with busyness, working too hard, taking on projects. And I think at the end of the day, what I really wanted was to just feel peace in my heart and in my world. And so cultivating peace in your life, I think, is one of the best things that you can do to have a happier life.
If you could go back and give your younger self one piece of advice, what would it be?
You know, sometimes in my meditations, I feel like I do connect with my younger self and I give him advice because I remember when I was a kid connecting with, I guess at that time I didn't really have the words for it, but connecting with a voice that would say, well, this, you're okay. You're going to be okay. And I think that that reassurance is what I would give now, is that you'll be okay. Things may be hard now, but you'll get through this and it'll be so worth it. So just keep going.
Yeah, 100%. What is one message that you'd like to share with the world?
Peace begins with you. We have so much power to affect peace in our own lives, and it's ripples out. The more peaceful we are, then that peace is rippled into our kids, into our relationships, into the world. And I think the world just needs a lot more peace right now.
Yes. And the last question for you is, what does it mean to you to be a champion and have a champion mindset?
For me, a champion mindset is one constant self reflection and growth, never accepting this as the final version of myself, but knowing that every challenge that I face is an opportunity to grow stronger and to improve and to love myself more.
Yeah, awesome. Thank you, Sol. I've been sitting here thinking about how much power we give to those little notifications on our phone, and it's quite something. It's a big thing that I'm taking away today as well. It's like my daughter has said to me, Dad, get off your phone as well. It's something that I've got to do as well and set those hard boundaries, so it isn't being cold. You were going to say something?
Encouragement is here an opportunity for your listeners to find more peace. Turn off all notifications for everything. You don't need to know. And honestly, just keep your calendar up so you know when your next meeting is, and that's all you need. So I've turned off all my notifications. My life is better for it.
Yeah, 100%. I do the same. My phone, from the time I get up to most of the day, is on focus mode, and it's usually says podcasting with a happy face on it. And so, in fact, right now my computer has got a happy face and it's in podcasting mode. And yeah, I'll deal with it when I get to it. You know,
Love
but
it.
I'm living in the present moment of what have I got to do in this present moment, and just focus on that. It's actually how you show up properly for your kids, and when you stop fighting, you get to be a great mum and dad again. Not that you never are, but it's just that you're just going through some challenges. So thanks for coming and joining us on this podcast and keeping it real for us. I really appreciate it. So if you're out there, you've been watching this episode and you're struggling with a difficult situation at home, you'll find all of the links of Sol's work in the show notes, and you'll also find it on the episode page on the Champion Mindset Collective Hub. If you found this helpful, also share it with someone else that may benefit from it, and subscribe to this podcast. It's amazing how many people watch these videos, but they don't subscribe. So yeah, the more you subscribe, the more we can get this out to the wider world, and we can bring on amazing guests like Sol, who are doing amazing things in this world. Lastly, I just want to say thank you for joining us on the Champion Mindset Collective. And I want to say you are loved, you're worthy, champion your life, champion your greatness, and have an amazing day.